Tolerance is defined as a willingness to accept behaviour and beliefs that are different from your own, although you might not agree with or approve of them. Is there a difference between tolerating cultural norms or tolerating that which affects our religious beliefs? May I submit to you that both are connected. There are those who currently live under state-sanctioned intolerance of beliefs and practices of the Christian faith. To what extent should we go on intolerant, despite persecution, discrimination and threat to life to our brothers and sisters in other nations? And is there a risk of an international intolerance creep? Will we see persecution rising in the West in the near future? Doctrine of Tolerance refers to a belief that everyone has a point of view and should be respected for it. It holds that all philosophies, all religions, all opinions, all are equally valid without being able to judge one as being morally superior to others. Historically, we saw the intolerance of the religious priests bending the will of Pilate that led to the brutal death of Christ. Why? Because Jesus challenged the political, social, and economic structures of his society, teaching all who listened that all may bear the name of Yahweh, reserved to that point only to the Jews. The crucifixion of Christ was highly politicized, even with the religious high priests and lawyers of the day, totally confronted by his teaching on the inclusivity of the Gentiles, challenging the very core of identity of the Jews. The life, death and resurrection of Christ was highly political, not by Christ's intent, but necessity. For when you're addressing religion, you're addressing the economic, social, health, education, welfare and governance structures of how we are to live. Did Jesus have a political mission? Essentially, the political mission of Jesus was to restore the kingdom principles of leadership and governance to a fractured world caught up in self-worship and pleasure. Sound familiar? It was Constantine in the 4th century that politicized the church, triggered by what he referred to as a conversion experience, with his efforts not only legalizing Christianity and giving respite to a cohort who had been persecuted for the last 300 years since Pentecost, but also calling to the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, which formed the tenets of our current Christian faith. Constantine's efforts went beyond the practice of the early church, and for a time in history, church had more power than the king. This was never the intent of Christ. The politicization of religion under Constantine led to a blurring of the powers of the crown and the church. Religion is in every way political, but it should never be politicized. In its first 3 centuries, the Christian church endured persecution at the hands of Roman authorities, having significant historical and theological consequences for the developing faith. It has been calculated that between the first persecution under Nero in 64 to the Edict of Milan in 313, Christians experienced with 129 years of persecution, 120 years of toleration and peace. Persecution sparked the spread of Christianity, prompted defences and explanations of Christianity, and in its aftermath raised fundamental questions about the nature of the church. To more recent history, it has been estimated that more Christians have been martyred in the last 50 years than in the church's first 300 years. Around 250 million Christians face significant levels of persecution in the world today, according to the latest World Watch list from Open Doors. During reporting for the 2018 World Watch list, 366 Christians were killed, 1,252 were abducted, 1,020 were raped or sexually harassed, and 793 churches were attacked. Researchers for the organisation estimate that 1 in 12 Christians live where their faith is illegal forbidden or punished. When Baha'i, who is 22 years old and her mother came to faith, their community in India became aggressive. Baha'i and other Christians refused to deny Jesus and were violently thrown out of their village. Baha'i went to Bible school to strengthen her faith so that one day she can return to her village with the gospel. Behind the veil of intolerance for Christianity is a political agenda, one that would seek to silence faith, hope, and love. As a fundamental tenet of any society, religious freedom has been asserted, fought for and celebrated by men and women throughout history. Often those same men and women that were persecuted and understood the grave price it is to pay for a life without these fundamental freedoms. The freedoms of speech, association, conscience, and movement are associated to freedoms, essential for this resistance to government to define or impose beliefs or practices of religion able to be exercised only in jurisdictions which uphold political freedoms, punch their constituents and their right to engage in the political process. So this unfortunately is not the case for the millions of Christians persecuted for their faith daily in many countries around the world today, particularly for those who come under blasphemy laws which punish converts out of Islam by death. Take blasphemy laws in Pakistan, for example. An estimated number of 1,274 people have been charged under the stringent blasphemy of Pakistan between 1986 and 2010. But according to sources, 51 people accused of blasphemy were murdered in Pakistan before their respective trials were over. Take the example of my mother country, where the ideology of socialism sought to kill the concept of God, religion and church. The Communist Party of the Soviet Union, in accordance with Marxist-Leninist interpretation of history, saw religion as a capitalist remnant that would inevitably disappear as a social base disappeared. Romania became a communist nation during World War II under the force of the USSR. The Romanian anti-religious campaign initiated by the Socialist Republic of Romania under the doctrine of Marxist-Leninist atheism took a hostile stance against the religion and set its sights on the ultimate goal of an atheistic society where religion would be recognised as the ideology of true life. Under this regime in Romania, more than 5,000 Orthodox Christian priests were imprisoned, and the Orthodox Archdiocese of Cluj contains biographies of 1,700 church personnel jailed. Of course, our modern-day example in our region is China. Despite increased pressures, Christians in China are faithful. Christians in China face not only persecution, but legal imprisonment, torture, and even death. The common denominator in all of these scenarios is a political ideology that seeks to wipe out religious beliefs, thought, practice, association, freedoms of speech and movement, which in turn affects the political expression of each of these adherents. The global genocide of Christians continues. Despite international conventions and charters professing freedom of religion and associated freedoms for all persons, the preservation of religious equality is a matter of fundamental concern to the Australian people, which ultimately finds its expression in Section 116 of the Commonwealth Constitution, preserving religious freedom and religious equality. There are a number of important international treaties which protect religious freedom. Probably the most important one, which Australia has undertaken to be bound by, is the International Covenant on Civil Political Rights, Section 18 of which provides for a broad right of religious freedom. The Covenant commits countries to respect, protect, and fulfil the fundamental civil and political rights of individuals, including the right to life, freedom of religion, freedom of expression, the right to peaceful assembly, freedom of association, and the right to non-discrimination and equal protection of the law. Religion is not covered as a protected attribute in the four current federal anti-discrimination acts. It is, however, the subject of several exemptions, as we've heard earlier today. Freedom of religion is one right among many others, and so in practice this right coexists with a broad suite of other human rights. Both the state, Victoria, and the ACT, where I'm from, have enacted general human rights instruments which contain explicit protections for religious freedom through these charters. It is in case law that we find the best articulation about freedom of religion defined, but also more recently challenged. In the Scientology case, Your Honours Mason and Brennan, in their judgment, defined the state's role in relation to religious belief as having no prophetic role under our laws, and went on to state that the state can neither declare supernatural truth nor determine the paths through which the human mind might search in a quest for supernatural truth. Religion is therefore legally protected interest in case law in Australia, but may well be threatened under our statutory structures. On defining religion, the United States courts have defined religion broadly as a system of belief which one contain on supernatural element and which go beyond theistic religions. Courts in England have taken a much more narrow approach to defining religion, citing that the two essential attributes of religion are faith and worship, which require faith in a God and worship of that God, limiting the concept of religion to theistic religions. Their honours in the Scientology case went on to consider the expression of religious freedom, stating freedom of religion, the paradigm freedom of conscience, is of essence a free society. The chief function in the law of a definition of religion is to mark out an area within which a person subject to the law is free to believe and to act in accordance with this belief without legal restraint. Such a definition affects the scope and operation of Section 116 of the Constitution and identifies the subject matter, which other laws are presumed not to intend effect. Religion is thus a concept of fundamental importance to the law. Arguably, wherever the legislature prescribes what religion is, or requires the executive or judiciary to define what religion is, the definition will inevitably become narrow, tainted by political agenda posing an ultimate threat to religious freedom. In a New South Wales matter, Justice Gibson in 1976 made explicitly clear in his judgment that in this country the law recognises a complete freedom of conscience in matters of religion. No one is compelled to adhere to or to endure any particular religion's opinion, and a member of a church is perfectly free to leave that church and join another which professes different beliefs and has a different mode of government. No court may prevent a citizen from abandoning religious beliefs previously thought to be fundamental and embracing new and essentially different faith. In fact, in 1943, the High Court held that national security legislation disproportionately encroached on freedoms of Jehovah's Witnesses' religion and the exercise of their faith in public to the possible security threat on the nation during wartime. How times have changed. On 4th of August 2016, Mrs. Clubb was seen by police to be standing at the eastern boundary of the Eastern Melbourne Family Control Clinic, standing about 5 metres from the entrance to the clinic with pamphlets in her hand. At 10:30, she approached a young couple entering the clinic, spoke to them and attempted to hand them a pamphlet. The young man declined the third pamphlet and moved on, with the young woman away from Mrs. Clubb. The evidence in this case and the court in this matter did not at all establish what was said between Mrs. Clubb and the young couple, but the pamphlet that Mrs. Clubb passed on to them or offered, which offered counselling and assistance to enable pregnancy to proceed to birth, was seen as a violation of Victoria's laws. In this recent High Court case deciding whether exclusion zones are constitutional, the High Court held that current laws in Victoria and Tasmania were valid, turning the compassionate religious act of prayer, counselling and outreach into political communication, arguably at the risk of compromising on Australia's freedoms of religion, association, expression, speech and practice in public. In this recent High Court case, religious expression and its associated freedoms has been interpreted as political communication, dangerously redefining religion into a category that was never intended. This club was charged in the Magistrates Court of Victoria. So, dare I ask, how were Mrs. Club's actions different from Jehovah's Witnesses handing out a watch magazine outside the supermarket, Mormons door knocking and white parties? This causes distress at the centre of the argument. So what distinguishes communication of religious thought in public from public communication that is political? And should they be measured differently? In the related federal court decision in Evans, where the full court, in ruling on the invalidity of some regulations constraining religious comment during World Youth Day, where legislation is ambiguous, it would not be interpreted so as to favour the internationally recognised right of religious freedom to the maximum extent possible, referring at paragraph 79 to the fact that an important freedom generally accepted in Australian society is freedom of religious belief and expression. So in Mrs. Club's case, the argument that was made was that anti-abortion material is reasonably likely to cause anxiety or distress. This is a subjective test and is difficult to prove on the facts of the case, and in this particular case, the evidence did not establish what was said between Mrs. Club and the man. The question that was asked was, did Mrs. Club's behaviour actually constitute political communication? It was argued that although the evidence does not establish what Mrs. Club actually said to the people seeking access to the court, it may be inferred that her conduct in passing on the pamphlet or trying to was directed solely at persuading the young lady from having an abortion. So the implied freedom of political communication is an implication from the democratic structures of the Constitution and Parliament that a Commonwealth state should not unduly restrict free speech on political issues. Since when is the expression of your conscience with respect to their honours? I just wonder, was not Mrs. Club expressing her religious views, that every life is precious and worth saving through association with the group that she was with, by exercising her freedom of belief, by talking about her beliefs in public? So may I It is well established that most activists against abortion are expressing their religious convictions in the context of providing alternative services such as counselling and suggesting alternate options for the parents such as adoption, or to simply stand by in silence while praying. I think it's very active, beautiful Catholic nuns in the ACT, and now we have an exclusion zone there as well. So our exclusion zones are subtle erosion of the right of citizens to express their freedom of belief in public, their freedom of association with a like-minded group to do so, and the freedom to express their religion and convictions. Should we indeed tolerate such persecution to the expression of our faith here in Australia? I'm going to now take you to some comments by Professor Ian Benson, based at Notre Dame University in Sydney. He argues that conflicts of rights involving the freedom of religion should be approached on the basis of a close examination of the proper constitutes of law and religion in a post-theocratic age that views constitutional law as operating under and within the conditions of diversity and pluralism. So a pluralistic society is expressly recognised and secularly defined as providing a place for communication, the different spiritual traditions, and the nation. Therefore, expressions of secular intolerance that are hostile any kind of political or cultural relevance to religious faiths. So such intolerance seeks to exclude the activity of its citizens. Professor Benson goes on to note that appropriate talks need neither endorse relativism nor negative judgment, but should reflect the conditions of living together with disagreement or modus vivendi under conditions of pluralism and civic virtues. It is a mark of a liberal regime that conflicts of values are viewed as signs of error. Therefore, genuine tolerance and genuine diversity must beware of counterfeits as they move towards this living together with disagreement or modus vivendi. The political intolerance of religious identity, practice and expression in public and private life leads to liberal fundamentalism insofar as the intolerance of the tolerance that is assumed to exist by the other side. Where law is respectful of diversity, that it can accord with pluralism by refusing to narrow the options that allow religious diversity. Where on the other hand, the law dominates and religious pluralism actually poses a threat, control of religion by law. So if law is a codified expression of the will of the government, law is central to the outworking of its ideologies. Even though the law is meant to be framed by constituents informing the will of the people to their representatives, there's obviously a disconnect there in our society at the moment. In essence, law is the most successful social engineering tool and often drives industries such as media, education, and economic frameworks. So subordination of religion under law, therefore, is dangerous, as is the subordination of law under religion. They therefore must be held in tandem with the fragile exercise of freedom. Professor Benson suggests that law can be about justice if it can recognise that it does not have the principal role of creating a just society, but must stand back to let the arguments about justice be made by others that are suited to its complexity and metaphysical richness. If we're not to engage in public debate on important matters of the law just because of our faith, therefore policy, therefore politics, engage in the process, the silence will be filled with the darkness when it is void of the light. We need to put aside the promise of persecution as we know it's coming and even promised to us by Christ. We need to tolerate, not intolerance, but the process of dialogue, for it is our duty to bring light to our fellow man. In this way, I believe that we can reflect the political strategy of Christ if he had one. Professor Benson notes that the struggle, therefore, is not between church and state any longer, even if it once was, but between a wide variety of contested concepts, meaning faith, both religious and non-religious, whether the new sectarians can learn coexistence and whether the religions can defend their understanding remains to be seen. What will be needed is for the new movements to learn how to temper their enthusiasms, coexist, and not seek to dominate. If our freedom of religion is compromised, so is our freedoms of movement, freedoms of association, freedoms of conscience, which leads to a violation of our freedom of expression and our political freedoms. The risk of sounding like an empty gong, the need to transcend social norms of political engagement, not leave behind faith, hope and love, but rather express these as we exercise freedoms innately and divinely endowed by the Creator, who's created us in his image, with a voice, with influence and authority, and with a mighty hand that saves. For after all, this was Jesus' own religious character. Tolerate not that which seeks to oppress and suppress, but rather tolerate the process of debate by presenting the truth.